Good day, everyone. I'm Mark Halperin. Welcome to Two Way, and this is our second edition of The Diner. David Burrell of WIC and I are going to talk to you today about an issue that President Trump has put front and center, question of whether the U.S. should purchase Greenland from Denmark. The Diner is something we're super excited about, and I want to take a moment here at the beginning to explain it. We think Two Way is a perfect place to have sophisticated and important national conversations where there's a divergence of opinion, to have them in the two-way ethos of peace, love, and understanding, presumption of grace to all, but give everybody an opportunity to actually talk about it in an extended way, to bring together a poll so people can understand where public opinion is, and then expert opinion, as well as voices of Americans. And the ethos of this is, again, right in line, rhymes with what we do here on a regular basis. You take people who have one position on a public policy issue and expose them to the leading arguments of the other side. We think that's an important thing to do because too often people who have a position on something only get opinions that reinforce what they already think. The central element of the Diner is to allow people to hear what the other side thinks, what arguments are made in opposition to their point of view on a public issue, and see how they react to that, see if it persuades them, see if it's an idea they've ever heard of before, and whether they find it to be a credible idea. Even if they don't change their mind, and that's not the point of this, it's not to change people's mind, they can at least have greater appreciation for the rationale for people who oppose their point of view, of why they have that opposing point of view. Today's issue is the question of whether the U.S. should purchase Greenland. It's an issue that has been put on the table, as I said, by President Trump. We're grateful and lucky and fortunate to have today two former U.S. ambassadors to Denmark and Greenland, one appointed by a Republican president, nominated by a Republican President Trump, one nominated by Democratic President Barack Obama. And so David will join us. David will run through the Diner data for the poll, and then how we expose people in the process to the opposing point of views. We'll talk to the ambassadors some about where they stand, what they think of the data and the discussion, and then we'll bring you in. And we'll bring you all in groups to talk about it, hear what your position is, hear what you think of the opposing arguments, why you hold the position you do, and then what you think of some of the arguments made by the people on the other side. There's obviously gradations here. There could be a purchase, which is what is being put on the table. There could be some sort of other affiliation, but for simplicity's sake, we're kind of creating that main question of should the United States purchase Greenland and establish some sort of relationship that's direct, short of statehood, but with a direct relationship. So with that, let's bring in David Burrell. Again, David is a great pollster, researcher. He's partnered with us on a lot of projects at Two Way, and WIC is our main partner, the partner we have for the Diner. So David, welcome in. Thank you for joining. I turn it over to you to run through your presentation, explaining again how we approach this methodologically and what we found in talking to folks around the country about this question, where people stand on should the United States make the purchase. David.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to share my screen. We'll get into it. All right, just give me a verbal yes when you're seeing it.
Yes, sir. All yours.
All right, great. Well, hello, everyone. Again, I'm David Burrell. We're partnering here with Mark to kind of co-produce this show, and I'd like to say we want this Diner, and Mark just nailed what the Diner is and why we're doing it. But we want to be a kind of an immersive research experience where we really get exposed to other viewpoints and see how America reacts to it. We have a poll presentation that'll be followed by a two-way style kind of live focus group. And with expert analysis with the ambassadors here threaded all the way through. And with that said, I'm just going to kind of get started. And so we did a poll of 1,000 registered voters. And normally I'll walk through that first. I would walk through that first. But what I want to do first is kind of skip to one of the punchlines that we're going to find out here. And that's that Americans really care, registered voters really care what Greenland thinks about this, what Greenlanders think about this. So before we get into our poll, I kind of wanted to pull up some data that we've seen related to whether America should support or oppose a proposal. But first, go into what do Greenlanders think about it. So there are 3 polls out there right now that we've seen in January. Unfortunately, we only had one of them, the first one, when we did our research, we did our poll of Americans about whether Greenland supports this. As you're going to see, they weren't all using the exact same wording, but poll A said that only 38% of Greenlanders oppose it and 57% support. That's almost 20 points in favor of the acquisition, of the purchase. Poll B, all we found out, they didn't say too much about the data, was at 78% oppose. And then in poll C, it was 85% that oppose. So I bring this up because this matters. What Greenland think matters to Americans. We're going to find that out here in a minute. But everyone's here maybe thinking, well, what is this, A, B, or C? And really the answer is probably D. It's none of the above. I don't think any of these polls are actually credible. Now, none of these three polls really posted their methodology. I believe from the first one that they're doing random dials to Greenlanders' landlines. You might say, well, that's good. That's how polling used to be done. Well, only about 10% of Greenlanders have landlines. So this isn't a representative sample of the Greenland. It's a representative sample of the 10% that have landlines. So that's a certain type of person. So I would not give that, a great methodological score there. And if we look at the other two, they may be even worse because there's only, one of them had 1,000 completes and the other one had almost 500 completes. And they say they were conducted via the web. There's less than 45,000 adults in Greenland. The only way that you have 1,000 completes online or even 500 is if you sent the poll to your subscriber base or you intercepted them on your website. So that would be equivalent to Fox News sending a poll to Fox News subscribers and saying, these are the results, or New York Times sending it to New York Times subscribers and saying, well, we waited and these are the results. So wanted to start there. I do think it's important that a real poll was done in Greenland. These results are all over the board, and you're going to figure out in a minute, America really cares. All right, so let's switch back to our poll. What do Americans think? What do registered voters think about the purchase of Greenland? Well, it's less popular than seeking ownership of the Panama Canal, but it's more popular than adding Canada as a state. So 43.6% in our survey said they support the purchase. 40% say they oppose the purchase, 40.2, and that's a net 3.4. So as you can see, Canada was a net negative 4.9, and seeking ownership of Panama was a positive 9.4. So when we look at some of the demographic and political narratives that you would, then through the crosstabs, as you're going to see on the right here, what we found out is that the supporters of the proposal are much more likely to be male than female. And they're also much more likely to be young than seniors. From a political perspective, it's what you expect. Republicans and conservatives much more likely to support the proposal to purchase Greenland, and Democrats and liberals much more likely to oppose it. So now we kind of have set the table on where America stands on Greenland. We know that we don't, and so what Mark said, our favorite part about the diner is taking the people who oppose the proposal. So they're represented in blue here, that 40% that oppose the proposal to purchase Greenland. So we expose them in the survey to three viewpoints, or viewpoints from three different people who support the purchase, and vice versa. This 44% that said, no, I do not support the purchase, we expose them, or I do support the purchase, we expose them to the viewpoints of those who oppose the purchase. Additionally, after each viewpoint, we ask three questions. Have you ever heard or considered this viewpoint before? Do you think it's reasonable for why someone has the opposite stance than you do on this issue? And then at the very end, we list all the viewpoints again, and we ask the supporters, hey, of all these viewpoints of these people that oppose the proposal, which one do you find most convincing, and vice versa. So let's get into the first viewpoints. Again, these represent the opinions of millions of Americans on this issue. We're going to talk about how people on two different sides can use the same topic to make their points. So Rick says this isn't just about new opportunities, and Rick supports the purchase. If we don't act now, China and Russia will continue to act in our place, threatening our current investments in Greenland and increasing the U.S. reliance on China for key natural resources. So that's his viewpoint. Joy, who opposes the purchase, says, so the answer to our economic issues is to pour trillions into another country under the banner of security and natural resources. This is giving me deja vu from the 2000s forever war funding that created, not prevented, a debt crisis. All right, so let's see how people who oppose the proposal responded to Rick's viewpoint, that the threat of China and Russia acting if we don't. Well, as you can see here, only 25% said they had ever heard or considered that viewpoint before. And over 50% of them suggested that it was very reasonable for why Rick has an alternative stance than them on the issue. So let's flip over and look at Joy and her viewpoint and how people who support the purchase responded to her viewpoint. Again, and hers is that this is deja vu from the 2000s forever war funding. So only 48%, again, it's a lot higher than with Rick's, but only 48% said they had heard or considered it before. And look at this, only 13% said that this is not reasonable for why she has an opposing stance on the issue. All right, next topic, we're going to talk about, again, I wish we had all the polls when we did this, but we didn't. But so Michael, who supports the purchase, says the people of Greenland overwhelmingly support a U.S. acquisition when asked about it in recent public opinion polling. Again, that was the only poll we had at that time. The political class and elites may oppose it, but these days that's often a sign of a strong sign of a good idea. And Tyler, again, who opposes the purchase, says both prime ministers of Greenland and Denmark say it's not for sale. Trump knows this, which is why he's using threats of tariffs and the military to try and strong arm them into submission. This is imperialism. Oh. All right. So again, only 17% of people who opposed the proposal said they'd heard or considered Michael's viewpoint before. And only 34% said that it's not at all reasonable for why he has this stance. Flipping over to Tyler's, 47% had heard the viewpoint before, 44% had not. And when asked, and once again, only 17% of people who, again, the people who support the proposal for the purchase answered that it's not at all reasonable. So we'll do our last one here. All right, so Angie, she says Trump's last administration, despite the media's prediction of World War III, was historically peaceful. The chaos began after he left office. If Trump says we need to acquire Greenland, it's likely to reestablish peace, not to provoke war. Whereas Nicole says, by expanding and refusing to rule out military action, Trump is giving our enemies cause to do the same. China already has its eyes on Taiwan, and Putin has claimed that invading Ukraine was in response to NATO's expansion. Okay, 24% said that they had not heard or considered, or that they had heard or considered Angie's viewpoint before, and only 48% said it was not at all reasonable, which is the highest, but still less than 50% of people. And looking at Nicole's, once again, less than 50% had heard or considered it before, and 16% said that it was not at all reasonable for why she had an alternative stance. So last two slides here. So once again, when we expose those that support the purchase to all of the viewpoints, we said, hey, you may disagree with them on this stance, their stance on this issue, but which of these viewpoints did you find most convincing? It was Tyler's viewpoint, which is again why we brought the Greenlander polls up about what Greenland wants and what Denmark wants. And it was Joy's about deja vu from the 2000 forever war fundings in the name of natural resources and peace. Opposingly, those that oppose the purchase found the viewpoints of Michael, referencing the polling in Greenland, and then Rick referencing the economy and the threat that Russia and China of them potentially taking action when if we don't. So that is the polling part of the presentation, Mark. No more slides.
Okay.
Research results.
David, thank you. Appreciate it. David will be back, but let's take David down, screen down, and ask our two former ambassadors to come in. Rufus Gifford has joined us before on this matter, former U.S. ambassador for President Obama to Denmark and Greenland, and Carla Sands, who was President Trump's ambassador there. Both Mr. Ambassador and Ms. Ambassador, thank you both for joining. Very grateful to you. I'd love you to just start by saying, Ambassador Sands, you first, just what you're in favor of President Trump's position, I know from your writing. I'd love you to just respond to what you saw in the data and in the survey and what you think of the meaning of those results.
Well, I know that the American people care about the Greenlandic people and that they want them to have opportunity and security like we do. And so those polls are those polls, but there have been other polls. The ones that are done by the Danish government are very negative, and that, it depends on how you write the questions, the answers that you get. Other polls I've seen from third-party, pollsters have been much more positive, actually majority positive. But they're going to have a referendum, no matter what we talk about on this, platform today. It's this spring. The Danish premier said that we are going to go independent just about 3 weeks ago from the podium. I was shocked. I thought it was a decade away or more. But this makes the urgency of President Trump's proposal that much more important. I think that when they have their referendum and they vote, depending on, which party succeeds, we'll see the direction that Greenland's going to go. But I know that President Trump is not going to leave Greenland and that entire GI-UK gap unprotected as it was when I arrived at Post in 2017.
You both, Ambassador Gifford, I always look for commonalities. You both have great affection for the people of Denmark and the people of Greenland. You both have thought quite a bit about the relationship to the United States, the importance of it as security, and both of you, I know, have thought a lot about the threat that China and Russia pose in that area. So react, if you would, to both of what David presented and to what Ambassador Sands said.
Yeah. So Mark, one, thanks for having me back. So look, I think there's a few things here, and mostly it's like, you can't have this conversation without understanding the nuance. Ambassador Sands mentioned the referendum that is likely going to happen this spring. That's certainly has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. It has to do with Greenlandic independence from Denmark. Now, the thing and I would obviously love to see the question, how this polling was presented, meaning the questions that these folks were asked, because I believe this, and this is, I think, a lot of data that backs this up. Greenland has had an independence movement and has had it for decades at this point. They want to be Iceland. They don't want to be Guam. And I think if you were to pose it that way, I think their intention here would be extremely clear. So I think it would be very, very challenging. Obviously, Greenland is a notoriously nearly impossible place to poll, just based on everything just based on essentially how complicated Greenland is just across the board. But do I think that this is the larger thing in the holes that I think exist in the argument across the board, is that both the economic argument and the national security argument, there is zero reason why the US government cannot go in and engage in these sorts of conversations, both on the national security side and the economic security side right now. There is nothing holding that back. And in my mind, I think we should go all in. I think we should absolutely do that.
Are you, just to clarify, are you opposed to a United States purchase?
Oh, I'm opposed to the United States purchase. I am. And okay. That's largely has to do with, look, I am opposed to United States purchase because especially because of the way this has been pitched by President Trump, which is, we need it. Now, that is just simply not the way the free world works. You want a lot of things in the world, and you just can't necessarily go grab it. So there is a process. There is a process through which Copenhagen needs to be involved. There's a process through which Nuuk has to be involved. I am extraordinarily skeptical that the larger political forces, both in Copenhagen and Nuuk, would ever embrace what Donald Trump has expressed here. Extremely skeptical. And for an ally that's been as loyal to the United States over the course of the decades and centuries as Denmark has been, to treat them like this, I really do believe is a slap in the face, both to Denmark and Greenland. So that is why I'm opposed. It's not because, it's not because we shouldn't have a closer relationship with Greenland. I absolutely believe that we should. It's the tactics that I'm opposed to more than anything else.
So just to clarify with you and then go back to Ambassador Sands, it seems like the argument that you find for your side in opposition, the one that you lean on the most is a notion of its imperialism.
It is imperialism. Right? Look, if doing what Donald Trump has threatened to do is imperialism, yes. A diplomatic solution to this is obviously not imperialism, but that has not been prioritized, at least in recent weeks.
Yeah, Ambassador Sands, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So looking at reality, Denmark is a nation about the size of the state of Colorado in population and GDP. They can't afford to continue to send $600 million a year to Greenland as a sort of wealth transfer to keep Greenland part of their kingdom. They can't afford to continue. But more than that, they're part of NATO, and NATO has Article 3 before it has Article 5. Article 3 says that every member state has the ability to defend their own territory, and then Article 5 come to the defense of others. Denmark can't even defend Denmark. They do not have the capability. NATO gives them a failing report card every year, let alone defend that entire giant GIUK gap. So that's from Greenland to Iceland to the UK, because just north of the UK is the Faroe Islands. So this is a huge area of responsibility. The country of Greenland is 1/3 the size of the continental US. It's the world's biggest island with 57,000 people. There's not a road between two towns in Greenland. They have zero infrastructure when it comes to developing as far as companies investing. There's just nothing there. Denmark has never bothered to develop Greenland. It has a colonial past. They can't afford to defend it. And if they could, they would. I begged them every year to put more toward their defense, to have a credible defense, to put assets in the Greenlandic area. But as a matter of fact, I had the former Danish ambassador yell in my face they would never give more to their defense. So they were, and that she worked for the government. So that is clearly, it was not on their dance card to actually make any changes. When I had one heroic mayor say to me, I have this map and I've designed, I want to do a road between my town and Kangerlussuaq, which is a major airport that our US military built when we occupied Greenland during World War II. We built all their ports, all their airports, and all modern buildings at that time. They were living in largely pre-industrial ways in Greenland before World War II. And when that mayor tried to build that little, it was a road, but it was a road for like three-wheeler vehicles. It was a simple road. He couldn't get Greenland or Denmark to step up and help fund it. So literally no infrastructure. Many people have no running water in their homes in Greenland. And they're related, they're very close with our native Alaskan population. And so I worked with the governor of Alaska to help build capacity in Denmark. I worked with the State Department to build capacity, in Greenland, to help them, achieve their Greenlandic dream. It's not going to happen if they are part of Denmark, because Denmark just, first of all, they don't really have the interest, but secondly, they don't have the capability.
All right, so I want to.
Can I comment on a few things there, Mark,
of course.
So the first point that I just think is, well, we do need to discuss NATO here, because this idea that, the point, I think we can all agree that the purpose of NATO in this day and age is really, really focused around Article 5. The reason why the Baltic countries in particular were admitted into NATO was because there's simply no way Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia could defend themselves as...
Finland has a real military. Their peer nations have real militaries. Denmark does not. Not yet. They're great allies, but they have a long way to go.
Carla, which peer nation of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania could defend those countries against Russia?
I'm not talking about those countries, Ambassador.
Well, that's
talking about Denmark.
So
you're conflating. You're doing whataboutism, and I'm not.
No, I'm not at all. You said during this that
they're not claiming. They're not claiming Greenland either.
What?
Those small countries are not claiming Greenland. We're talking about Denmark and Greenland, so let's stay on the subject.
You made that.
Yeah. But Rufus, go to your point about Article 5 in NATO. How is that applicable to what we're talking about?
The point here is that any NATO country. So there's a lot of talk, and other folks have said in the past that President Truman has wanted to buy Greenland, and that is true.
Yes, President Trump's the third U.S. president to propose
that is correct. But you know what the solution to President Truman was? NATO, because when Denmark became NATO and NATO became this alliance, one of the purposes of NATO was simply that we wouldn't have to occupy the Baltic countries in order to defend against a Russian threat, that in fact it's an all for one or one for all approach. And that's why Article 5 is so important. So, there is look, the European leaders have gone on record for saying that if Greenland is ever invaded by an adversarial, by one of our opponents, that the alliance would be compelled to respond. And that's just simply true. And
Yeah.
Kind
remember,
of like Ukraine,
Well, there
What?
was a response.
what's that?
kind of like Hong Kong. Okay.
Well, neither of those
Yeah.
countries are NATO.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I understand that.
What
Well,
I'm saying is that
Rivers.
Europe doesn't really have a credible deterrence.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
hold on, Rupert. If you have another point you want to make, I'd like you to make it, but then I want to ask
No,
you
go
another
ahead.
question. Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah,
let me just say
yeah,
this real quick though,
yeah,
because I think some of the ambassador's points are important. That the infrastructure in Greenland is weak. It's hard. I mean, there is zero doubt that private industry, no country should necessarily. I mean, I think it would be extremely difficult at this day and age when we're talking about shutting down USAID like we are today. That the idea that we would spend literally trillions of dollars building infrastructure in a place like Greenland seems to be kind of missing the point of everything from what the Trump administration has stood for, especially in these first couple of weeks. I mean, we are talking about trillions and trillions of dollars of American taxpayer investment based on what Ambassador Sands just said.
That's not true. Sorry to interrupt, but Greenland, it has mining potential, but it hasn't realized it. So I was able to get funds to help them, get that in a good place. But as a matter of fact, there will be other ways they can live largely like Alaska with their sovereign wealth fund and have generational wealth that they build. And Governor Dunleavy has told them he will teach their leadership how to build that sovereign wealth fund, how to have credible mining, sustainable fisheries, all of these things
right.
that they've successfully done in Alaska where people live well. That's something that we can do in knowledge transfer to Greenland. That doesn't involve trillions of dollars of government money.
Yeah. Let me get us back to the spirit of the diner. And I'm not going to try to convince either of you to change your position. I just want you to comment on my synthesis, I hope I do it well, of the argument each of you are making, and just comment on it, however you wish. If you want to completely rebut it, if you want to express some appreciation for it, please do. And for those who are also here, please raise your hand. We want lots of you to be able to in on the conversation. So if you'd like to get in on the conversation, if you're here on the two-way platform, please raise your hand. If you're watching on YouTube or X, please feel free to comment. So Rufus, I'll start with you. This seems to me to be things that are true. There has to be a greater check on Russia and China in the Arctic than we have now. That has to happen. I think the ambassador makes a good case. Denmark's not going to do it. And independence is not, they can be independent, but they're going to need an alliance with somebody because they can't do it themselves. And there's also extraction that would be in their interest and in the United States' interest to do. So to say oppose the sale, you're not really engaged with again, from this point of view, the reality of what's on the ground. This has to happen. The United States, in this case, is the indispensable nation. President Trump is driving towards an aggressive solution that other presidents have looked at, and that if the U.S. doesn't do it, what's the alternative? Denmark's not going to solve the problem of development and defense, and they're not going to solve it by themselves. So if not the United States, what's the alternative solution? How do you feel about that argument?
Is this a military conversation or a national security conversation or an economic security?
It's
Well,
both.
it's both. It's both.
take them apart.
They're hand in hand because
but I think
whatever
the
economic,
solution is
but whatever,
different.
let me just finish.
Yeah.
Whatever economic development we don't do in concert with the Greenlanders, Russia and China could do. So
That is
so it's a little bit of a zero-sum thing in terms of defense and economics, and they need to do both. And that would include not just extraction. It would also include tourism, right? We need to build, they need to build that up, and they're not going to be able to do it on their own. They simply don't have the wherewithal to build the roads and the airport improvements and the luxury resorts and all the things they can do. So again, there's that argument to me is President Trump's proposing the only solution that gets us where they need to get and where we need to get. What are your thoughts on that?
on the economic argument, because I do think you have to take them very different. I think you do have to take them separately. There is zero reason, and I can't say this more strongly, that we cannot engage in this conversation right now. If American private industry, Ambassador Sands did this, I did this, every ambassador, every American ambassador, as well as other ambassadors. Obviously, the Australians have been extraordinarily invested in mining in Greenland with some success, but actually some disastrous outcomes. It is a challenging place to work, but let's do it. That's what I say. Let's open up hotels. Let's expand the airports. We've all done this. I know Ambassador Sands has done it as well. Again, this does not require American ownership of Greenland.
I don't know what you're saying I've done, but I'd like to know what you're saying I've done.
Hold on one
I
second.
think you've encouraged American private investment in Greenland.
Yeah, Rufus, Rufus, what about the defense piece then? How do you address that?
So I think the defense piece. So look, right, and Ambassador Sands mentioned this as well, that there was a time, of course, when essentially the American military presence on Greenland, which then was sort of expanded into a larger NATO military presence in Greenland, was considerably more significant. There were multiple bases. The main commercial airport in Greenland, as Ambassador Sands suggested, was an American Air Force base at one point. Now, what has happened since the end of the Cold War was that American military presence has scaled back. There would be no one more excited to have a conversation of a more scaled up American military presence in Greenland than the Greenlanders and the Danes. Again, this would require a negotiation, but they would absolutely welcome it and embrace it, in my mind. Now, it would, of course, I will say this, though, Mark, and this is the one thing that's very, very important. The Tula base, which is now called the Pacific Space, and Ambassador Sands has been there more recently than I have, but it's the most expensive military base in the country to maintain. At least it was when I was there. Now, that means that if we are going to greatly expand our American military presence in Greenland, we will have to make the tough budget decisions that do exist in that part of the world. Ambassador Sands talks about Alaska over and over again. Alaska is by the way, Alaska, if you just look at the map, is considerably farther south than Greenland. The part of Greenland that is above the above the Arctic Circle is essentially about 2/3 of Greenland, whereas Alaska, it's only like the top little bit. This is extremely complicated. That being said, if we want to increase our American military presence in Greenland, let's do it. If there is a need and a desire and a national security concern there, we should absolutely invest. Let's do it. Again, does not require us just throwing out decades of diplomacy between us and one of our greatest allies on the planet.
All right,
just if I may, really briefly, Ambassador Gifford is ignoring the fact that Greenland's going independent. Denmark's not even part of the conversation. This is going to be Greenland, and whoever they partner with, we hope that it's us. And that's why it's very important to wrap this up. They're literally going independent. It's faster than I thought it would be. And I think that the reason that they've accelerated the timetable is because President Trump was elected and that they see opportunity for the Greenlanders. And, our Pacific Space Base, that's great. But there's a lot that's not being paid attention to. When I got to post, so much wasn't under the US sort of eye, if you will. We had taken our eye off the region and we had just kind of walked away. I couldn't get State Department assets there. I couldn't get DOD assets there. When I went to EUCOM, they were totally uninterested. I was in talks with NATO to get more NATO assets, but NATO has their mission and it's much more complicated because NATO has all the member countries. But Greenland, it's very, very tough. The people, they have societal challenges and there's capacity limitations because it's only 57,000 people in this giant body of land. But as a matter of fact, they want opportunity. They want more good paying jobs. They want to actually be able to develop in their way, but they love hunting and fishing. They don't want to leave that behind. So it's really important to get that right on behalf of the Greenlanders. President Trump understands the national security issue. He also understands that China has control of most rare earth mineral mining and processing in the world. Greenland has huge deposits, and that's opportunity as well. When I got to post, China had a minority interest in a majority of the mines in Greenland. They had tried to pull the Greenlanders into their Belt and Road Initiative, flown the premier and his government and CEOs to Beijing, rolled out the red carpet. They tried to fund and build the airports the Greenlanders wanted. They tried to buy an old U.S. deepwater port. The U.S., with the peace dividend after the wall fell, the Soviet Union fell, we really pulled back our defense spending. And the consequence was that we left the region basically to Russia and then to China also.
Yeah, I want to ask you one question, Ambassador, and then bring in folks in. But I want to clarify one thing. I think you both can do this in a communal way. If they have a vote this spring for independence, is that binding? Does Denmark just let that happen? What's the timetable here? It's the point where they might be independent.
Let me just comment on that,
Yeah.
Mark, because Carla is massively oversimplifying the process by which Greenland could become independent. Even if they do have this referendum that says that they would like to go independent, we obviously know there have been independence movements around the country. It's going to require a considerable amount of negotiation between Copenhagen and Nuuk in order to have that actually be binding and occur. In addition,
sorry, let me just interrupt just for factual clarification from either of you. What's the law? What's the law that governs? Is it Danish law? Is it Greenland law? Or do they have on the books that, like some states in America do, the option of referendum, or is this ad hoc? How is this happening?
Well, it's Danish law is the answer to the question.
Yeah, and so under Danish law, if they get it on, if it has to be the legislature put it on the ballot. How does it get on the ballot?
The Copenhagen legislature or the Nuuk legislature?
Either one or both.
I think you can just call a referendum, and I think the way. So there's a few different pieces here, though. So remember this: that Greenland is already partially independent. So they're
semi-autonomous.
They're semi-autonomous. So in essence, now it's a little bit, I consider it the way I describe it right now, it's a combination. They are less American than a US state, meaning they are less connected to Copenhagen than a US state, but they are more connected to Copenhagen than, say, a US territory, than Puerto Rico or Guam. Like, for example,
because they were a colonial nation, they were owned by the king.
Well, but my point is, I mean, democratically, meaning they have voting interest. Actually, the individual Greenlander has a larger representation in Copenhagen than someone who lives in Denmark. Meaning they have 2 members of parliament for 55,000 people.
But again, I just want to pin down this. If there's a spring referendum, is it clear that it would be binding, or that's to be determined?
The referendum happens, then they're having elections for a new government this spring as well in Greenland. If they vote to go independent, it will then go to the Danish parliament, and the Danish parliament will have to vote on it.
That's right. My point in that, and then my point is that it becomes extraordinarily complicated, because the only part right now there's several different parts, right? So Denmark still controls the national security and the foreign policy of Greenland. The domestic issues are controlled by Nuuk, but that's still, they say, the legal system, the policing system, that is still Danish. So if there was independence, Carla's sort of mentioning that independence is going to happen tomorrow and it's just going to happen. Were this to happen, it would probably be a process that would take years. The idea that it would happen by the spring is simply not realistic.
Ambassador,
I mean, I do think there's a scenario where they become like Canada is to the United Kingdom, meaning sort of like a Commonwealth country, because frankly, the royal family in Denmark is actually extremely popular in Greenland. So there could be a relationship like that. But again, this is all extremely complicated. Centuries, frankly, of history that they need to unpack. Not all healthy, of course, but centuries of history that would take time to try to sort through.
Ambassador Staines, do you agree with that this would take years to happen?
Well, I think we're working at the speed of Trump, so I'm not sure what the timetable is.
Okay, last question for you, and then David's got a question, and then I want to bring folks in. I think, again, Ambassador Gifford and some of the folks in David's research say this is no way to do this, that this does reek of imperialism and pressure and leverage around things like the might of the United States. That's not the proper way to do it, that it would be better to be done, as the Ambassador Gifford said, through negotiation, through diplomacy, not not leveraging America's strength as a military and economic power. How sympathetic are you to that argument?
Well, I think there will be negotiations. I think there are negotiations going on. So, I think it's to be determined, but I know that Greenland will be in a more secure position by the end of President Trump's term.
Okay, question from David, and then we're going to bring folks in to join the conversation. David.
All right, get off mute. Y'all really covered in depth, and I learned a lot on a lot of the issues. I mean, pretty much 5 of the viewpoints that we went over, and maybe you covered this as well. But do either of you think this move is provocative or would provoke China and Russia to expand? Because that was one of the viewpoints that someone had on our research survey, or is that not an issue?
Who are you asking?
Well, go ahead.
Okay,
both of you can respond.
I look at Spratly Islands, where China has expanded under President Obama. Xi Jinping said, we're just going in there. We're not going to militarize the Spratly Islands, which were disputed islands. They weren't owned by China. And son of a gun if he didn't absolutely militarize them. So what China is doing is spreading out their territory in order to launch war, to have more influence in the world militarily. But you can see they're opening bases in places like Djibouti. They're also opening giant shipping ports, for instance, in South America and throughout the world. I mean, there are European countries part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So China is absolutely expanding its sphere of influence. And like I said earlier, they claim to be a near polar country, and they claim ownership to about 40% of the wealth under the sea and in the ground in the Arctic, because they say they have that many population, so they should be entitled to it. There's a very sort of supremacist sort of idea in the Chinese culture that they're entitled to this. And so I think that we do have to sort of make sure that Greenland is secure and in a good place, because China doesn't stop. They play the long game. They have their 5-year plans, but they have their 100-year plan. And so we are, getting toward the end of the 100-year marathon. And we want to make sure that our North America is not in the Chinese sphere of influence. It goes for in the South as well. It's not just Greenland. It's in the southern US, for instance, South America and Central America. The majority of those countries' number one trading partner is China, and they're part of the Belt and Road. Yeah,
I think the argument that Carlos Sanz is making right now is exactly why we cannot pursue the same road right now, because what it does is we lose the moral high ground. Because the essence of your question, David, is if we were to, through imperialistic means, take over Greenland in a non-democratic and not diplomatic way, at what point can we have the moral high ground to say to China, well, you can't do the same thing to Taiwan? At what point can you not say to Russia, you can't do the same thing to Ukraine or Moldova or what have you? And I could not agree more. Do I think that this allows the United States to lose that moral authority? 100%. And that is probably the issue right now that is most important to someone like me and someone who cares so much about these transatlantic relationships.
Okay, great conversation. The ambassadors are now and David are going to step away, but they're going to listen to the conversation. We're going to bring a group of you in. They're going to listen, and they'll come back and respond towards the end. But they're going to bring a number of you in. I'm going to want to start by just asking you all, once everybody's on the screen, a show of hands of where you are on the central question we're exploring is, do you support or oppose American purchase of Greenland from Denmark? So Al has joined us, and Julia, and Melvin, and Tyson, and a couple more folks coming in here. Let's give us a moment. We'll have Katie. And okay, and then Katie also, right? Okay. Again, for those of you who are up here now, by show of hands, raise your hand if you support the sale of Greenland, of the American purchase of Greenland. Raise your hand if you support that. raise your hand. All right. All right. And raise your hand, hands down, raise your hand if you oppose it. All right. So Tyson, are you opposed? No, you all support it. All of you support it. Okay. We'll start with this group, not a diverse group. Everybody's for it. So let's go around and just ask you to tell us. I'll unmute everybody here in turn. Let's start with you, Julia. Tell us why, in brief, why do you support the purchase?
Well, it runs home. I live in Hawaii, and we have a very similar history. And what I think is let the Greenlanders vote and let them decide who they want. It shouldn't be the Prime Minister of Denmark. It shouldn't be any of the big NATO. It shouldn't be any of these people influencing the vote.
So Julia, just to clarify, you only support it if the people of Greenland want it.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And I feel very confident they do. I'll say quickly, I'll tell you, in Hawaii, I was talking to a Hawaiian. In 1959, they chose to become a state. And there was many other powerful countries wanting Hawaii. It was going to be taken over by a powerful country. Fortunately, I believe, because it's part of the United States, the Hawaiian kids, their territory increased. The children from Kamehameha School can go to university in any 50 states. They can relocate anywhere in the United States. And so the opportunities have been greater. Plus, I'm very concerned about the Greenlanders because they have the highest rate of suicide in the world. For 800 years, they've been neglected and not really, they've just been in the afterthought. And now, how many presidents or prime ministers have actually flown into into Greenland to find out what they want?
Yep,
Don Jr. went in there, and I feel they should let them vote. But I believe they want to have the opportunities and, expand and live off of their land, their sacred Aina, and benefit.
Thank you, Julia. Al, tell us why you support a purchase.
I think it's a strategic position for the military. I think we have other countries eyeing it anyway. And I think that, I know there may be positions opposing it, but we need it would certainly help us in protecting our interest and peace through strength and position us, I feel, better.
Okay, Al, thank you for that. Nathania.
I feel exactly the same way Al does. I feel for our national security, Greenland's national security, because they're not getting what they need from Denmark. And as a superpower, we should have an expansion plan in our back pocket. I mean, every other country does. We should. And Greenland is optimally positioned to help us with our national security. And in turn, we can help them. Again, I agree with the woman from Hawaii. The Greenlanders must be on the board with this, or it's not fair to them. But overall, I do agree completely. We should buy it.
Okay, Tyson.
Clarify, I'm not necessarily opposed or for purchasing it. We have to have a look at the long strategic game from this. I hear hey, it's national security, rare minerals, but the things I worry about from the rare mineral is the infrastructure. The lack of infrastructure, as one of the ambassadors said, north of the Arctic. So mining is going to be probably not very good there for quite some time. It's cold. It might be something that we want to look into, much like what China's doing with Africa in obtaining mineral rights through the capitalistic, they're doing it with contracts and so forth. So now if it's for strategic national security purposes, sure, if it's the right price and Greenland wishes to do it and it's something that we could purchase at the right price, then yeah, but certainly not just for or against it right now without some additional information on the strategic viewpoints of where we're going with this. I just don't want to throw good money after bad money.
Yeah. Melvin, Melvin, thank you, Tyson. Melvin, why do you support the purchase?
Well, I support the purchase, and as long as we respect the sovereignty of the people of Greenland, that's very important, and that's consistent with our own philosophy. And I think I've heard implications that, we're going to go in militarily or by force or by threat. No, I do not see that. But it's good to ask, work with the people of Greenland and get the polling and the real polling, some verifiable polling, and get their input on it. And it's I think, a mistake, or maybe a bad way to look at it, to, in essence, compare us with the way Russia and China come into a nation. We do not do that. We go into a nation maybe for a rescue type operation to save people from the cruelty of some, and that's the historical aspect of it. But I'm convinced that if the people of Greenland are interested in becoming part of the United States, whether as just a partner or territory, we can let them make that decision. And then also, one more thing, it appears that the people of Greenland have not ever been given the opportunity to develop. They have been always under the foot, so to speak, of a king or Denmark, where they have been neglected and not have been able to develop their resources. With us as a partner, at least, they will have that opportunity, and the so-called trillions of dollars to be spent, it would come from their resources. We're not pouring money into Greenland like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Rukshi?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's Brooksy, and
Okay.
I'm actually advocating for opposition to purchase of Greenland. I put it this way: how would America feel if an outside nation came to demand purchase of America itself?
Not
And
demanding
so when
purchase.
you put terms,
Not
when you
demanding.
put the
Julia, hold on,
terms in
Julia.
that sense, purchasing another nation it's almost ignoring the rights of the people of that nation. It's
That's
ignoring the
Hold on.
independence and the individuality of that nation. And so I think if you think of anything that has been purchased over time, it depreciates, it lacks, and it tends to pull away from any kind of consolidation. So there will come a point when, if indigenously the people of Greenland do not believe in becoming commodities to America, they are going to rebel, just like Americans rebelled against the British. And so I think in the name, the Greenlanders should have the freedom to decide if they want to join America. And another, I think a stronger solution would be to include Greenland in an equal partnership with America, because you have Greenlander Americans who can jointly lead a delegation to ensure national security interests as well as economic interests for both the United States and Greenland equally. But it should be on an equal footing of reciprocal, equal human, spiritual relations.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I saw, it was fascinating while you talked. I saw heads nodding and I saw heads shaking. And I know people want to get in. I want to clarify, okay? For the 5 of you who say, or maybe Tyson's a little different, for the 4 of you who say you support it, am I right that, raise your hand if you agree with this, that you only support it if the people of Greenland support it? You only support, right? That's right. You only support people of Greenland support. What's happening now is President Trump is asserting that the people of Greenland would like it. He's asserting that they'd be for it, but he doesn't really know that. And we don't really know what the data shows. So you all are not, some of the things that were just said suggest that President Trump is kind of forcing the issue. He's forcing the issue. Do you feel that argument is, that the argument should be you're for it, but it's premature to try to do it anytime soon until the determination is made about what the people of Greenland want? Julia, what do you think of that framing?
Yeah, I actually agree with the lovely lady that spoke last. As long as the the Greenlanders are supporting it, I don't feel like I'm not feeling, but I don't understand. I don't think Trump's trying to go in and take something over. I just say he's just very strong at saying what he'd like. but I think he's open to negotiation with Greenland, this just comes home to me because I was born and raised in South America. I lived in Brazil, Venezuela, and the Chinese, they are quiet. They don't make noise, but their imperialism, they're conquering lands and buying lands everywhere, and they're quiet about it. So everyone thinks they're good, they're being good and proper because they're being quiet about it. I prefer being around somebody that's blunt and honest. This is what Trump wants. Let's get voting for it. Let the Greenlanders decide. Let's honor their sovereignty. Let's not have the Danes and all these other mechanisms going in, and let them vote for it. That's what I think. But he's not trying to take over anything.
Okay, Al, go ahead.
I think that Trump is just President Trump is bombastic. I think his approach is to get a conversation started, and it's you got to start somewhere. And if we don't take action and try to resolve this, somebody else will. And somebody will do it just like I believe it was Julie said. They'll sneak in the back door and do it. And before you know it, it's going to be occupied. And I think the U.S. has the resources, the opportunity, and the expertise to build the country and help them out. I am strongly in for bringing Greenland, and I mean we don't even have a poll that's accurate. We haven't put boots on ground to see get an independent interview with people that actually live there to see what they feel. But I do think that the conversation has to be started. President Trump did this, and I think that it's a hard conversation to have, and he did it. So now look at where we are. We're discussing it.
All right, Sandra's joined us. Sandra, what's your point of view on this?
I think that no matter what the reason is, and I do think it's probably a good idea. However, Trump will probably be the one who incites a further confrontation. So the faster he goes, I just feel that his idea of saying, "Oh, if we have to use force," that sets. Well, I'm just saying that's my interpretation.
He's not going to use force.
Hold on, Sandra. It's okay. Do you oppose or support?
I would support negotiation if the
Do you support the United States?
Yes, if they did it.
Purchase.
Yes, I would, but not with force. And I do think that Trump's bombastic approach is wrong.
Okay,
that's my view.
Who's of those of you who supported a purchase? What arguments have you heard on the other side that give you pause, if any? Just jump in if there's anybody.
Well, I think you're getting into. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Well, one of the arguments that we hear is that Trump is going to go militarily. Now, we must recognize or remember, he has been focused on getting America out of military struggles and battles. And I don't see him going into Greenland with military force to take it. And so that's the way I see it. Now, I'm going to be consistent in believing, and it would be a shock and a disappointment if he did.
Okay. I want to thank this group. Very, very informative discussion. Al, just give me a moment. Going to bring in another group, but you all just continue to listen and raise your hand if you want to come back in. Okay, your hands are all down. Bring in a new group: Ed, Dean, Anita, Pete, and Sue. And again, want to get a show of hands once everybody's in. Physical hand, not your electronic hand. Raise your hand. I'm going to take Al out and add in one more. There we go. Okay. Raise your physical hand if you support the purchase of Greenland. Raise your hand if you support the purchase of Greenland. All right. So that's that's Ed and Dean. And raise your hand if you oppose. That's Pete and Anita. All right. So we've got 3 and 2. Going to unmute everybody and start with Sue. And Sue, just tell us what's your rationale? Why do you oppose it?
I liked the ambassador's argument, Griffin's argument. I think it smacks of imperialism. And for me, I think the big key is if the people of Greenland decide that this is what they want, then maybe there's a way to move forward to that. But there are so many other things that we could do in the meantime. We could, as the ambassador said, go in and start doing something now in terms of security, mining, building infrastructure. All of that could be done without the confrontation, without the bombacity, without the threats of tariffs against Denmark. And I also don't buy the argument that was Ambassador Sands had. Right now, Trump is cutting off aid to all kinds of other countries. And a lot of people that I know who are MAGA are saying America first, that money needs to be here to help our people, not their people.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time squaring that,
Yeah. Sue,
argument.
Thank you for that. Again, not trying to change your mind, but what's the most compelling argument you've heard on the side to say purchase?
I do think it's a national security issue. I do think that we need to do something, but I also really don't believe that the Danes or the Greenlanders would want China or Russia, that they would choose that over the United States.
Right. Okay. Ed, why do you support a purchase?
I support it diplomatically only. We bought it before. We had a chance to buy it, and then Congress decided to tell President Seward no. He'd completed the deal back in 1867-68, and they went crazy over the idea. They approved it that he bought Alaska for $7 million at that time. But we could have gotten, I think it was for $5 million then, equivalent of $111 million in today's dollars. But even if it's approved, I'm not sure that Congress, by the time it gets there, that we'd get the money from Congress to pay for it. But I think we should do that attempt. Right now, it's protected diplomatically with our treaties. We are not in danger currently. I think we need to go diplomatically. If we don't, I think we're going to hurt ourselves with the battle over Taiwan and over the fight we have with Russia. I think we should keep the high ground and wear the white hats.
So Ed, you're for a purchase, but you're for a purchase done through a diplomatic process, what you're saying.
Diplomatic process with Denmark, yes.
Yeah, okay. Anita, why do you oppose a purchase?
I oppose the purchase because Greenlanders want to be Greenlandic. Everything that I've been reading recently about this, and I sort of did a deep dive after the Borden show that I watch, it seems to me that they want to be able to control their own destinies, and absolutely they should. I associate myself totally with what Ambassador Gifford said in terms of the rationale. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, keep going. You're doing great.
Okay, with what he said about the what would happen, the attitudes of people around the world if we were just to walk in and try to buy something like that. They have resources that we can use, and we can partner with them. We already do through the Arctic Council. And I don't see any reason why we can't negotiate a win-win, as President Trump always likes to say. We're going to have a win-win. I
Yeah.
think we should try to do that. And I just want to add one other issue that no one's brought up so far that I don't think, and that is what's happening in terms of climate change in Greenland. It is really frightening. The melt, the ice is breaking. Just today, there were 2 reports released on that very topic. And there's something that we can learn from them, but I think they can also learn from us. We need to work together.
Yeah.
Because
Anita,
yeah,
I'm sorry. In the spirit of peace, love, and understanding, have you heard any arguments from the other side, the people who support a purchase, that you reject, that you think are just not strong arguments at all?
I don't think that the military argument is one that I think holds a lot of merit. I just don't. If there was something I were going to lean toward, it would probably be based on economics.
Yeah.
But the other two, I don't see that.
Okay, Dean, why do you support a purchase?
Boy, this is why I joined Two-Way. I love hearing the everyone's views. So thank you for that, Mark. And I hope the diner, David, I hope we get to hear from you about the method a little bit more as well. I think like everyone else, it's more about just the process. As I've listened to everyone, my view is I'm glad that I didn't even know that this was a thing until President Trump brought it up. Isn't it amazing? I love the phrase, the working at the speed of Trump, and the fact that he has planted the flag in a particular area. Now everyone is coming out and saying this is exactly what I believe. I heard Ambassador Giffords wants a little bit slower, methodical process. I heard Ambassador Sands maybe a little bit faster process. I'm not hearing a lot of disagreement in partnership, in moving forward, in making this happen. Now, I also believe, and I think most folks here would lean into American exceptionalism. So I believe we are wearing the white hats, even if it feels that we're being a little bit strong at times as well, based upon the person that's in the executive office now.
Dean, from either anyone who's on here who's expressed opposition to a purchase, including Ambassador Gifford, did you hear an argument that gave you any pause?
Again, nothing that gave me pause, only a little bit slower, more methodical view. And my counter to that would be that I think we can still do that. I love the fact that things have sped up. This has changed my map of how I believe, or what I believe, how long things actually take. I think, yeah. So.
Okay, I've not asked folks who they supported for president or what party they're in on purpose, but Pete, I know you're a MAGA supporter, a Trump supporter, and yet you said you're opposed to the purchase. So I'd love to hear your rationale.
I think we can achieve our objectives without purchasing Greenland and spending money on it. I would suggest that, assuming Greenland wants to have a relationship with the United States, that we negotiate a compact of free association similar to what we did with the Marshall Islands, where they can use U.S. currency, they get visa waivers into the United States, and we still have the benefits of having a tighter relationship with Greenland, but without spending the money. I don't think we need to spend the money to buy it, because I think once you buy it, we'll embroil ourselves in a bunch of other future independence struggles and things like that, that I think we can nip that in the bud by negotiating a compact of free association like we do with the Marshall Islands.
That's great, Pete. Thank you. I want to go around and want to ask you all, everybody to weigh in. Tell me an argument you've heard from the other side that either impacted you and you thought was a good argument, even though you don't agree with the ultimate conclusion, or an argument you heard that you think is not a strong argument, that you don't credit. Okay, either one, your choice. Ed, you first. What's something that the anti-sale folks have said that you just either think is a good argument or you don't like at all?
I don't like putting a lot of the decision on the few people that are on the continent, on the edge of the continent there, that originally were there for whaling. I think we should deal with Denmark.
Okay. Sue, what's an argument you've heard from the other side that you like or don't like?
Well, I didn't like the argument that the one gentleman said peace through strength. I don't say how going in and forcibly taking over another country is a peaceful kind of thing. I understand the national security aspect of it, but I don't see that as peaceful. It's not peaceful.
Okay. Anita, I sort of asked you before, but just is there an argument you heard from the other side that you like?
No, I wouldn't say that I like. I did see some good points.
Maybe I should say that you think was reasonable.
I thought that the economic argument made some good points, and I think that those could be picked up in a negotiation. But I absolutely do not agree with nor like the military piece. And I think that there's a way for us to get everything we need, and for the Greenlanders too as well, without even threatening military action.
Yeah, Pete, what's an argument you heard from on the other side that you thought was either reasonable or unreasonable?
Well, I think the reasonable argument is that this would be all done through negotiation, and not through any kind of force or intimidation of force like that, which is a compelling argument. The difference I have is that why pay for something when you can get the benefits for free?
Yeah. Yep. All right. Thank you all. Very grateful to you. Great conversation. Bring back Ambassador Gifford and David Burrell. Unfortunately, Ambassador Sands had to go, and we grateful to her for making the time that she did. Ambassador Rufus Gifford, start with you. What did you hear in the conversation from your fellow Americans that intrigued you or you think is important to try to clarify? Let me unmute you first. Go ahead.
Perfect. No, look, I would say this, that the folks who are speaking out in favor of purchase, I honestly think, Mark, that if that is the course forward, meaning if we had a plurality of Greenlanders and a process of diplomacy, which is essentially what everyone said, that I don't think there'd be that many people who would necessarily be opposed. Meaning if we brought everyone around to the table, let's be clear, that is simply just not what has happened over the course of the last few weeks. And I think that is what is ruffling so many feathers in Copenhagen and Nuuk, which has led to some of the statements by the prime ministers of both Denmark and Greenland. So but that being said, I think their arguments have been absolutely reasonable, Mark, without a doubt. I do want to make 2 points of clarification, though.
Yes, sir.
And
before you do that, I know you need to go. So make your 2 points. I want to ask you one quick question, and then
perfect.
And then well, there you go.
I'll just make one that's sort of the most important right now. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that Greenlanders are essentially do not have control over their own economic their economic prospects right now. That's just demonstrably untrue. Unless there's a national security argument associated with contracts, actually the Greenlanders have a tremendous amount of control over who has contracts, who is bringing in mining and whatnot. So that they actually do have control over that. And I just want to be clear about it because I think it's I think it's important. And these are some of the concessions that Copenhagen has made over the years as Greenland has moved towards more independence generally.
Yeah. The question I want to ask you, and again, it's a complicated one, but I'm sure you'll have at least a thought. It seems like we know what the Danish government thinks and the Danish people. They don't want to change the relationship, and have the United States take over. What would the reaction of the Danish people and the Danish government be if there was a referendum and if the people of Greenland said we want to be independent, or maybe even we want to be independent and talk to the United States? How would the Danish people, the Danish government react to that?
It's a good question, Mark. And I don't fully I will say this, and I'm giving you my personal opinion here. I would be shocked that an actual referendum in Greenland that they would favor an American purchase. I haven't said that yet. This is all speculative, of course, because we haven't seen it. It's never happened before. This is very new, but I would be shocked if at a time when they are moving towards independence, that they would say then that they'd prefer to be a colony of another country. So I just want to be real clear about that. Independence is a different conversation. I do think further independence from Denmark, there's a sense of inevitability of that in Copenhagen, Mark. I do think what this is my guess as to what would happen. My guess is that there would be some further negotiation where foreign and national security policy would still be dictated by NATO/Denmark, maybe via NATO or something, but that it would exist as a Danish Commonwealth country still, and they'd still probably be subjects of the king and the royal family. Right. That would be what I would guess. But again, I think that would take years to negotiate. And we're all speculating right now at this incredibly complicated time. And none of this has really ever happened before. And it is moving quickly, which I don't think is necessarily terrible. But I will say that it just makes everything so politically charged. And so right now, I just got back. I should say, I was in Copenhagen until yesterday. I flew home yesterday. And they are, the Danes in this right now are at DEFCON 1 because they are having a very, very difficult time trying to figure out how to navigate this new world order. And remember, look, I know there's been a lot said here about the Europeans, and they haven't been great partners here. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, Denmark lost more people per capita in Afghanistan than we did, than any other country in the world except for the United States. They've lived, fought, and died alongside of all of us, and we simply have to care, to a certain extent at least, about this relationship that we have, so many of us, frankly, have invested in over the years. There's one other note that I do want to say. There was one comment that I find very scary by someone who was on this call, and that was the comment was, every country should have an expansion plan. That is not the country that I live in. And that is not the country that I want to be part of. I do not. Expansion of influence, absolutely. Expansion of influence in every way. But we do not live in a world of imperialism anymore. And that is something I think that we in the West have fought against over and over and over again. So this idea that we should have an expansion plan, I certainly am strongly opposed to.
Mr. Ambassador, so grateful to you for coming back and making time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Always grateful. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. David Burrell, closing comments, please.
That was great. I think I'll just wrap it up. If I was having to summarize, like looking at the polling and also the conversation, there was a lot of alignment. I mean, the number one takeaway was everyone cares what Greenlanders think about this, and that whether you support it or oppose it, that has a huge impact on where Americans are on this. If Greenland supports or opposes it. Obviously, the polling showed that there was a lot of concerns about the approach towards this being imperialism. And I think we even saw that with people who said they support it in our focus groups. Yep. They said, well, okay, I mean, they conceded ground on the purchase. Okay, well, maybe there is another way to do it. Maybe that does make sense. Which, that's what the diner's about, is kind of finding those common grounds once we talk a little more about these things. I would say that, and I mentioned before, and I could be wrong because they didn't post their methodologies, I think it would be great to get some true public opinion polling that uses very strong methodology in Greenland. And I think that would help both sides and help America get to where it needs to be on this issue. I think that would be a good service to the country to get something. And what we saw there, I'm telling you, that was not real. It was not real.
Maybe we'll do it. David, if someone raised the question of your methodology for your poll, is that posted somewhere people can find, or can you explain it briefly?
Yeah, well, let's post it. Ours is conducted online through opt-in panels for this type of research. That's not how we do it when we're predicting elections, but these are effectively, large panels of people who have opted in to take polls. A lot of the national polls you see, even during the elections, are conducted this way. But that's not how those Greenland polls were conducted, though.
Yeah.
So it's natural sample of not likely voters, registered voters, 1,000 completes, and I will make sure to get a methodology page out on it.
Okay, and we'll share that on my Substack, and I'll tweet it out as well. Thanks to David, to both ambassadors, to all of you who participated, and I know some folks had their hands up and didn't get in. We'll be doing more of these on different topics, and I'll say again, very proud, along with my two-way colleagues and David. I don't think this conversation's occurred. If it's occurred anywhere, I don't know about it. To let Americans weigh in an informed way, to have two people so knowledgeable like those two ambassadors, I learned a ton, and that's what we want to do, both on two-way in general, but also with the diner, is to have these conversations that are thoughtful, sophisticated, long, and where all points of view are represented, and people get exposed to arguments they haven't heard. There needs to be more of that in America, and we aim to be at least one place that does it. Grateful to you all for making time. I'll be back in a little less than 3 hours on two-way tonight. I have a summary of what's happened today. President Trump has talked at great length once again at a signing ceremony in the Oval Office. As most of you know, probably there's been a 1-month delay in the Mexican tariffs based on conversations the president has. And I suspect by 6 o'clock Eastern, there'll be a delay in the Canadian ones too, but we'll see. There's some other news as well. We'll talk all about it at 6 o'clock Eastern time tonight. And then, of course, Sean Dan and I will be back tomorrow, not from Sean's kitchen, but we'll be back tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. So thanks again to David, all his colleagues at WIC who worked with us on this, my colleagues at Two-Way. And again, we'll have another diner for you coming up pretty soon on a whole different topic. Thank you, everybody. Again, thanks to the ambassadors.